So last week I made a video about the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, but this week we've heard that Russia is calling in mercenaries from Syria to fight on the front lines against the Ukrainians as part of their fighting force. And in today's video, I want to look at who these Syrian mercenaries are and why the Russians might have called them in to fight in Ukraine. Russia has quite a close relationship with the Syrian dictator Bashar Al-Assad, because Assad's regime faced a major challenge in 2011 with the Syrian revolution, a revolution that Russia weighed in on and helped Assad's government to crush starting from 2015 as part of the Syrian civil war. The Russians set up several bases inside Syria and particularly used their air force to devastating effect, allowing Syrian ground troops to occupy several rebel-held cities inside the country. The main tactic utilized by Assad's forces were to completely surround a city and cut it off from the other supply lines and the countryside around it, and then to bombard the city, both military and particularly civilian areas including schools and hospitals, until they surrendered. And if that sounds familiar to what we're starting to see in Ukraine, you're not wrong. The specifics of these siege tactics are described in the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian Arab Republic, where it's described that Syrian civilians in besieged areas countrywide have been encircled, trapped and prevented from leaving, indiscriminately bombed and killed, starved and routinely denied medical evacuations, the delivery of vital foodstuffs, health items and other essential supplies, all in an effort to compel the surrender of those governing or in control of the area in which they live. It is true that there have since been several humanitarian corridors agreed by Russia and Ukraine to allow civilians to escape in certain cases, although there have been many violations of civilians trying to leave certain areas that have been encircled by Russian forces. The reason why I'm sharing this with you in this video is because it's clear that the Russians are looking back to experience from Syria for how they are waging their war in Ukraine. And I believe it's for this reason that they are requiring Syrian mercenaries to come and fight alongside them to capture several key cities, as what occurred in Syria was largely that the Russian Air Force supplied the bombing power from above, whilst Syrian ground combat troops were the ones who went into the cities and applied pressure from the ground. They are therefore experienced fighters in urban combat. And seeing as Russia has managed to partly encircle the capital of Kyiv, as well as almost completely encircling the second largest city of Kharkiv and another important city in the very southeast of the country, Mariupol, they will certainly need to be engaging in urban combat against the Ukrainian forces that are doggedly holding on to these civilian centers. These centers being vital if the Russians do indeed wish to take control of the country and impose any kind of puppet government on its people. Now, on the 11th of March 2022, it was announced that around 16,000 Syrian volunteers, as they were called, would be joining the Russian force or had volunteered themselves to join the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Now, this came after the Ukrainian government had announced the creation of its own foreign legion, to which around now over 20,000 people have subsequently come to join. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin's press secretary, said, "If the West is so enthusiastic about the arrival of mercenaries, then we also have volunteers who want to participate." And it was leaked from a Syrian TV source that they would be paid around $1,200 to $1,800 a month for their services, and that they would be being employed in Ukraine behind the front lines to act as guards to guard military infrastructure and other camps of Russian soldiers and equipment depots. It's also been reported by various media outlets that the private military company called the Wagner Group has also been recalled from various combat zones. They have fought, for example, in Syria as well as in Libya and most famously in the Central African Republic to further either their own and some have suspected the Russian Federation's interests in these countries. But now it's been reported that they have indeed returned to fight alongside Russian soldiers in Ukraine. This isn't the first time that they have been deployed in Ukraine, as in 2014 when the war was at its hottest in the east of the country between the Ukrainian military and Russian-backed separatists in the Donbass region. The Wagner Group was also operating operating there. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has commented on the Russian involvement with Syrian mercenaries and said it's a war with a very stubborn enemy who has decided to hire mercenaries against our citizens, murderers from Syria, a country where everything has been destroyed, like they are doing here to us. However, if certain Russian and Syrian news sources are to be believed, the Russians aren't the only ones hiring Syrian mercenaries to go and fight for them. As while the Russians have been hiring or claim to be hiring the Syrian fighters from the Syrian Arab Army, which is the government of Assad, it has also been claimed by Sputnik, a Russian TV service, as well as a Syrian TV channel, that the Ukrainians have themselves been employing fighters from Syrian rebel armies from Idlib province, numbering around 450 volunteers who have already arrived in Ukraine. Although it is hard to independently verify these reports, this could very well be possible, seeing as rebel fighters in Syria have a vested interest and a reason to be angry at Russian forces given their support for the hated army of Bashar Al-Assad. And it's quite possible that some have indeed made it over to fight with Ukrainian forces. This would be rather interesting from a geopolitical point of view because just as is the case with Chechens in Ukraine who are fighting for both the Ukrainian government and for the Russian forces in the country, it would mean that there might be Syrians facing off against one another on Ukraine's battlefield. It's not yet sure if any Syrians have arrived in Ukraine to fight for either side. And certainly it's not been the case, as was seen before the Russian intervention of mercenaries that were sent over to places like Libya, that there weren't meetings between Russian officials and tribal elders in Syria who organized the movement of volunteers into Russian service. That doesn't yet seem to have happened, but it's quite possible, and for several of the reasons explored in this video, that Russia might want to look at hiring Syrian mercenaries. That alongside the fact that the invasion has not panned out the way that they expected, and perhaps they are relying on non-Slavic troops as much as possible because of the seeming unwillingness of many of these soldiers to fight against the fellow Slavic Ukrainians on the other side of the battlefield. This, of course, wouldn't be an issue for soldiers coming from Syria who have no such affiliation with the Ukrainians. Whether, when, and how these mercenaries will be applied on the battlefield remains to be seen, however, and we'll have to see to the future if that is indeed the case. A quick note before rounding off is that I will be giving half of the earnings from this video to various charities that are helping refugees to escape from the war in Ukraine. This isn't going to military funding, but to helping the people who have been most affected by this conflict. The millions of refugees who are now running for their lives from the violence. Whichever political side you might stand on, I hope we can agree that it isn't their fault what is currently happening, and that's why I'd like to try and do my bit with this channel and by providing some links in the description below to go and help as well. Alright everyone, that has been it for this video. I wanted to cover this topic as I've seen it reported on a couple times, and I thought it would be fairly interesting to continue this series on what's currently going on in Ukraine, and particularly the angle of looking at which other nationalities and countries are getting involved on which side, and what the history behind that is. Do let me know in the comments below if you found this video interesting. Do you have any more information on these various Syrian volunteers or mercenaries that are coming over to fight, and where did you get your information from? I'd always be interested to hear that. I should have another video up on Wednesday on another topic about the war in Ukraine and various things to do with that, so keep your eyes peeled if you are indeed interested. In the meantime, I have been Hilbert, and this has been The History.